Welcome to the groundbreaking news program that delves into the heart of Mormonism, your weekly window into the unique intersection of news, history, and culture that resonates with the tapestry of Mormonism. So whether you're tuning in from the heart of Utah or joining us from around the world, your favorite news program starts now, where news meets insight and the stories of our faith unfold.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Mormon Newscast. I am Radio Free Mormon, joined by my compatriots Rebecca Biblioteca and Bill Reel on this last day of September 30th, 2024 edition. All right, so if we can go to the very first, by the way, if anybody has anything you want to say at the outset, now's the time to say it because pretty soon it'll be over.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll go right into the top stories because we're all business here on the Mormon Newscast. The stories this week, or past 2 weeks even, are undercover stealth groundbreaking. I think Rebecca's going to be covering that. She has some groundbreaking news on that. Temple construction workers sue LDS Church. Other temple news. Tithing lawsuit update. And top 10 changes under President Nelson. So let's go to the first of those stories. Undercover stealth groundbreaking. I believe we'll be turning that over to Rebecca for her report on that story.
Ooh, this is so exciting. I'm at the top of the show. I rarely am. So this is awesome. You might notice I am wearing a Fairview United shirt, and the shirts are t-shirts, but an amazing viewer of Mormonish sent me this in the mail as a surprise. She made it into what I like, porn shoulders, right? So I'll lean up a little. There it is, Fairview United. And I'm wearing this tonight because we are going to be talking about a lot of things to do with the temple. There's several temple stories, and I'm just going to zoom right through them, but they're very important. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is Peruvian temple employees are laid off for failure to pay tithing. This just popped into my feed this morning. I saw it on Reddit, and it's kind of gathered steam. So this is a picture of a protest banner in front of the Lima, Peru temple, which you just don't really see things like that very often, do you? I haven't ever seen that. So I had to, the TikTok that I found describing the whole thing was mostly in Spanish. So I had to kind of rely on some of my friends who are Spanish speakers to kind of give me the gist of what's going on. So somebody translated the banners that you see on the right there in the picture. That's the courthouse. They're not only protesting in front of the temple, they're protesting in front of a courthouse because there's a legal case going on. So somebody said the banners basically say no to forced labor and no to firing workers for not paying tithing. Then it looks like a reference to a local labor law that the church actions might have violated, possibly. And then the next image, it says no harassment, no fraudulent termination, dismissal, and respect labor rights. So something's happening. That's what we know so far from looking at those banners. So then I had a few other people kind of paraphrase more of the information to tell me what's going on. And one person said the LDS Church in Lima, Peru, fired some workers, and it was clarified they were like cafeteria workers in the temple, janitorial, that kind of. So not a temple worker, because that would be shocking if temple workers were paid for going like this, right? I would take that job. That seems like it's not too hard. No, these are actual employees of the temple, and they were fired or threatened with dismissal because they didn't pay tithing. And that goes against the labor laws of the country. So these people are protesting outside the temple and also outside of the courthouse. So that's kind of what's going on.
Was that actually a picture of the Lima, Peru temple?
No, yes, this is a picture of the Lima, Peru temple without the protest in front of it. Yeah.
And without the spire.
And without the spire, yeah. Thank you for noticing. It's one of the 11 temples that does not have a spire.
So they're not necessary.
They're not necessary. And, I crunched some numbers today, and there are 5 temples that are under 68 feet. There are 40 temples that are right around 71 feet. And we all know that number 68 is really important when we're dealing with Fairview, because that's the code that they've said, hey, build it. Just adhere to this. So even 71 feet, there are 40 temples that are 71 feet, and there are only 190 temples right now in operation. So somebody in the chat, do that percentage. A lot of the temples are right around 71 feet. So just saying, Fairview, take note.
Additional question. Are we to presume that the people being fired here who were originally hired to work at the temple, that they are members of the church?
This is what I'm assuming. But again, because I do not speak Spanish, although I did take 2 years of it in college, it's escaped me. But I'm assuming that they are members, because otherwise, to make someone who is not a member of the church pay tithing, that's a whole nother issue, I would feel. So, but anyway, so I contacted Cultural Hall, right? I said, do you speak Spanish? You look like the type that would have gone on your mission to like Peru. And he's like, no, I don't, but I know someone who does. So he had somebody else kind of watch the entire TikTok and kind of listen and try to interpret it. So this is what the friend of Culture says. He says, there are peaceful protests September 25th and 26th in Lima, Peru. The protesters are asking to respect workers of the church who were fired or threatened to be fired for not paying tithing. And then this is the part I really wanted to know, and I just don't know. But this particular translator said it looked as if the church is possibly taking the 10% out of their pay directly. That would be something. And I can't confirm that, but the person listening to the TikTok, which we will post on the Mormon Newscast Facebook page. So some of our Mormon Newscast viewers who speak Spanish maybe can look at it and help clarify, because that would certainly be something. The workers have filed judicial proceedings in court because it is against the law and a violation of labor rights in Peru. The TikToker, there was a woman, she's, I think, Exmo. Oh, she has a name. I can't, Maria something. Anyway, she was the one that brought this to our attention. The TikToker thanked the internet for shedding light on this stuff and having thousands of eyes on it, whereas before churches and corporations did whatever they wanted without people knowing. And we do have a section of the TikTok. I don't know, Bill, do you think it's worth it to pull up just the little news story? This part was in English if we listen closely.
Today, September 26, 2024, we are exchanging a peaceful protest outside of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We are protesting against the arbitrary dismissal that contravened Peruvian law, which did not recognize failure to pay taxes as ground for termination due to gross misconduct, and especially not without providing labor benefits. This action violates both Peruvian legislation and the Church Court's principles. We have taken this matter to court. We wait the justice.
¿Qué estaría pasando con esta protesta?
Yes. And then it goes on from there. And that's the part I want everyone to translate for me. So it is an interesting issue, especially if they were somehow taking tithing out off the top. That, I don't know if it happened at BYU, but Wilkinson wanted it to happen. You know, that's a whole issue, because what do you take off the top? Gross, net? Who decides? So yeah, that would be quite something. What do you guys think about this?
I think it's a very interesting story. I don't know a lot about it, more than what you have presented here, and I'm glad that you got a hold of this story. I don't understand Spanish more than no culpable or no culpable. I think it's culpable. I don't even know that much Spanish, and so I don't have no idea what was being said there. But I think it's very, very interesting that there's a protest going on regarding firing temple workers for the failure to pay tithing.
I'll just second that. It seems like a strange thing to have a crew working on the temple and then to fire them because they're not keeping a religious observance. And it wouldn't surprise me if the church is unable to sort of keep up with all the laws in every single geographic location, having a worldwide church. And so whether they did or whether they didn't, I think there's always this possibility when you're in all places at once that you sort of mix up your cue cards.
Yeah. Well, and the other issue may be, do you have to be a current temple recommend holder in order to have a job like the janitorial staff or a cafeteria worker? Because that makes sense. If you do and you don't pay tithing, then you don't have a temple recommend. And so you leave your job. So it could be something like that. And these issues come up all over. Mormonish just did an episode with Neville Rocco on a bill in Australia where they're trying to say, no, you can't say that somebody has to adhere to your religion to work there. So these kinds of issues are kind of heating up. And because the church, I think, is one of the few that has a building that only certain people through a discriminatory process of worthiness are allowed in, it's going to come up more and more. So we'll keep you all updated on this story. Again, it's just brand new, something to think about. And we'll definitely post that TikTok on the Mormon Newscast Facebook page so you guys can all take a look at it. All
Well,
right.
I learned as a teenager in the church that not to look down on the janitorial staff at the temple because there were only 2 people. So the rumor went who had access to the Holy of Holies. And one was the president of the church and the other was the janitor.
Makes you wonder who gets more of the revelation, honestly.
And I don't know if you guys mentioned it, and maybe you did. I was trying to make sure the sound and stuff was working, but the church has done this before where it takes the money out. You mentioned that that's a possibility. They were taking the tithing out. We know that at least in some instances, and I think generally speaking, for instance, BYU professors and other similar positions, I think it's at certain points in time, they would take the tithing directly out of their paycheck. And I don't know that they're doing that in the current moment, but I just know in the past, there have been segments of church employees who have had their tithing removed on their behalf automatically for them, which is sort of a strange thing for your employer to take out this thing that is voluntary to pay.
Yeah. No, and I've looked into this before thinking, oh, I'll do a podcast on this. And there have been periods of time back in the early 1900s, church institutions, they want to take the tithing off the top. There have been other people that have said, no, that's illegal. So you're right. There's back and forth. But I mean, I have a story about that, tithing off the top, where I'll try to make it very vague. A family member sold some property that they were the executor of. Someone had passed away, and I was the recipient of some funds. And when I finally received the money and I went through everything, oh yeah, taxes and this and that, I saw that this relative had pre-tithed it for me, had gotten the lump sum, and before dividing it among all those who were supposed to receive it, had paid tithing on it. Thank you. I always thought if I'm ever an executor and I get a lump sum, I'm going to pre-tithe something to, I don't know, the Church of Satan. And I'll just put that a little line there on everything that everybody receives. So yeah, people got to tithe. Okay. More temple news. I'm telling you, that's why I'm wearing my Fairview shirt. Although ironically, we don't have Fairview news today. Okay, so this is a Cody Wyoming Temple update. And I think the last time we talked about it, the ruling had come down that yes, the church is now able to start building on that beautiful, beautiful site in Cody, Wyoming. So when you get permission to build, and sometimes not, in Heber, a groundbreaking, which is what we're going to be talking about, it happened 2 days after the announcement, 2 or 3 days after the announcement in conference. Sometimes they just go in without permits and consecrate the land. That's going to end up to be really interesting in Heber, and we'll talk about that probably in a month or two. So what is a temple groundbreaking? I know we have a lot of viewers that maybe are never-mos and they don't know what this is. So I'll give you some background on that and what it is. So a temple groundbreaking ceremonies are held for the temples of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to formally mark the commencement of construction. These events are often live streamed. They're often made available to the public. And on August 17th, just last month, there were 3 groundbreakings on the same day. Lots of media hype about that. So it's a very exciting time where you can see these pictures here. Golden shovels go into the ground. You have a program. You have dignitaries, usually area reps, general authorities, sometimes apostles, sometimes the prophet himself. Like I described in Heber, they had a big groundbreaking in Heber, I think 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, and the prophet was there. So you're basically saying, here we go, everybody, get excited. And you've got those golden shovels that you're digging into the ground right there. So here are some pictures just of general groundbreakings over the last probably 5 or 6 years. And exactly what I described there, right? You see lots of people. You see that big line of dirt to accommodate everybody that has a shovel. You see audience seated. You see people standing at podiums giving addresses. It's just a fabulous and exciting day that everybody looks forward to when a groundbreaking happens in your area. So let's talk about what happened in Cody, Wyoming. As far as their groundbreaking, I'm calling this the stealth groundbreaking or the groundbreaking ruse, if we can think back to the couple's ruse. So on Friday morning, just a few days ago on the weekend, some residents there in Cody who have a view down of the site where the Cody Temple is going to be built texted me and said they're putting down AstroTurf. You know, what is that? Does the temple have AstroTurf? You know, thinking maybe they were starting the construction. I said, oh, no. I think they're getting ready for the groundbreaking. And then they started adding speakers and potted plants, things you can see there. You can see how gorgeous this site is. I mean, I've been there. It is absolutely beautiful. And I said, probably they're getting ready for the groundbreaking on Saturday. This was Friday, because typically they happen on Saturdays. I've read articles about lots of groundbreakings. Most of them happen on Saturday. So the residents were kind of keeping an eye out the window. And then they texted me. They said, hey, there are some cranes that are picking up modules, containers from off-site, because you look at this slide, there's not a giant white container there, is there? No. And the cranes are moving these into sort of a blockade so that nobody can see from the road, right? Setting them up, strategically placed. And I said, okay, I don't know what that is. That's typically not part of any groundbreaking. And then they said, well, and also now all these dark vehicles have, sped in and they're parking. I said, okay, that would be the Sacred Service. They're always there attending. And I said, maybe it's a practice for the actual groundbreaking tomorrow. And then the residents let me know an hour or so later, all the cars disappeared. All the modules were taken away by the cranes. The AstroTurf was taken away, and it was as if nothing had ever touched it. And that's when I realized, oh my gosh, they had the groundbreaking. Like they just snuck in, did it, and snuck out, much like a polygamist marriage ceremony in a real temple. They do that, right? So then there was something in the news about it, the church news. As I understood it, no media was really invited. Maybe some were aware, but the church news and church media.
So you have confirmation that this did actually happen last Friday.
Well, I do now because I saw it in the church news.
Mhm.
I mean, on the church newsroom a few hours after all this excitement in the morning. But at that point, I couldn't say for sure. I did not know what had happened because it was so irregular compared to other groundbreakings that I'd been aware of. So suddenly, later afternoon, here appears in the church news on the newsroom, a groundbreaking ceremony for the Cody Wyoming Temple was held Friday the 27th. Yep. Stephen R. Bangeter, first counselor in the North American Central Area Presidency, presided at the event. Also in attendance was Elder Kevin R. Duncan, executive director of the Temple Department. So there are your dignitaries. And look at that picture. There's a few people there with shovels in the ground. It does not look like some of those other pictures that I just showed you, right? Where it was a giant circus. It goes on to say, in the dedicatory prayer on the site, Elder Bangeter asked a blessing on those in the community around the new temple. That would be the neighbors and residents, the ones that have been involved in a lawsuit for a year and a half. He said, we ask that they may feel a spirit of peace wash over them, granting them comfort and assurance that the presence of this temple will bring added joy, prosperity, beauty, and unity to their lives and their community, he prayed.
Prosperity.
Yeah, it's prosperity gospel. There it is.
Prosperity temple brews.
Prosperity temple brews. Yeah. So again, this is just so unusual. Once I found out that they really had done it, I had to dig in, talk to some of my contacts on the ground and see exactly what had happened. So I had it, who attended the groundbreaking? That was my question because it was a super small group. A member of the Cody bishopric confirmed that neither he nor the bishop knew in advance. So bishoprics in the area, at least in this ward, had no knowledge. The people who attended were known to be the two visiting authorities. We read about that in the press release, their wives, the Cody stake PR rep and her husband, and 3 stake presidency members without their wives, and then representatives from the wealthy family who donated the land. So that's all that was there. That's why it was so small. And that's why that piece of dirt was so small. Like usually it's a really long row with like 15 shovels, teeny tiny little piece of dirt there. The other thing I thought was really interesting is that general authority who was there for the groundbreaking, he stayed a few days in beautiful Cody, Wyoming, so that he could preside and speak at a stake conference within the Cody Temple District, right? And my source there said the general authority who spoke at the groundbreaking was speaking at a stake conference in a neighboring town that Saturday, but still in the Temple District. And there was absolutely no mention of the groundbreaking by the GA. There was no mention by the stake president, and there was no mention by anybody at all. And I find that very strange because
What do you think
I
accounts for that? I think it's strange too.
100% know that under normal circumstances, I can even hear the speech. The general authority would say, brothers and sisters, as I stood on that lovely site during the groundbreaking and as I consecrated that land, there would be a talk like that, but there was nothing, crickets. So again, I thought, okay, so maybe it's just a Wyoming thing, right? This is the third temple in Wyoming. Maybe it's just a Wyoming thing. So I looked up the Star Valley Temple. These are pictures from it. Look at all the shovels. There's a full-on choir. You can see chairs set up for, looks like 100 people. The picture at the bottom was recent, the Casper, Wyoming Temple. And they said it was very cold on that day. So they had the actual shovel sticking in the ground outside, and then they all went to a stake center to finish the festivities in the meeting. So to me, that sounds like a larger crowd. So it's not just Wyoming. Something is very different here at the Cody Temple groundbreaking. Now, a lot of people said to me, well, that little tiny strip of dirt looks like a grave. What could they be burying? So we had a lot of fun today. I made this one, Rest in Peace, Future Missionary Efforts in Cody. Somebody else said, here lies, love thy neighbor. I thought that was really good too. So if you have any other suggestions of what could be buried in that ground, go ahead and put them in the chat because I think that's really
Well,
funny.
you could put RIP to the spirit of unity that Elder Bangerter, I think
Yep.
it was praying for.
Yes. And the peace that will wash over them, all of that. So the whole thing was just strange. And then again, look at this gorgeous site. The very next morning, I think someone will tell me in the chat, but it's like a paver, a grader to start flattening the land. Started its work right there, just less than 24 hours after the groundbreaking, and they're off to the races. So say goodbye to that beautiful scene. That's probably the last time we'll see it right there. Anyway, strange story. Thoughts really quickly. I didn't mean to take so long on that story, but it was just so unusual to me.
Yeah, let me follow up with my question because you weren't done with your story at the time. What do you think accounts for this difference in having a stealth groundbreaking on the Cody Temple on a Friday as opposed to a public groundbreaking on a Saturday, which is the norm?
Yeah, I believe that they do not want any kind of negative publicity. And if we've been following Cody, which I know a lot of you have, it has been a roller coaster with litigation, feelings, community relations ripped to shreds. It's very difficult. And I guarantee that they don't want any of the residents standing there with their signs that say, please preserve our neighborhood. They don't want anything like that. And it's even a dicey issue within the faithful community because, some of the faithful say, well, why can't we just build it somewhere where it's zoned for? Others say we have to build it at any cost. I sound like a broken record, but this is happening in many cities. And so I think they're just trying to keep it as clandestine as possible.
Very, very interesting.
Yeah.
Great report. Do you have any comments or questions, Bill?
Just that had they announced it ahead of time, had they given the community or just the lay members of the church a heads up, it seems like they would have ran the very risk of what I think they tried to prevent, which you guys have already noted, which is people showing up and making known their public opinion about what was going on.
You see, I just think that if I'm the church, I'm going to play this differently. I know this has been contentious. I know this has been problematic. I know this has been divisive. Why not try and heal that instead of exacerbating the situation by doing a stealth groundbreaking, which people are going to find out at some point, i.e., Rebecca and here, people are going to find out about it. Why not just do an invitation to all the citizens of Cody and say that I know this has been difficult. I know it's been troubling for the community. We want to approach everybody in the spirit of goodwill and healing and invite everybody to the groundbreaking, and we'll have refreshments, have this and that. And, if people want to bring signs, fine, that's okay. But at least make the overture of trying to heal things instead of continuing to make things worse.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I know talking to some of the residents, they're like, what is this? Why are they so sneaky? What are they doing? They won't tell us what happens in their temple. And now they're doing a sneaky ceremony. Just the optics are really, really bad. You're 100% correct, RFM. Now's the time to start trying to heal the community. And this is the exact opposite of this. This is trying to pull something over their eyes. Once again, just confirming their worst fears and concerns. So, and there is another little angle to this story. RFM said, hey, doesn't this remind you of something that happened in the past? And I had to think, I'm like, I think I know something about that. He goes, look this up. It'll make you look smart. Thank you. Because I do need help looking smart. And I said, well, if I present this story, RFM, what will you do during the newscast? And he said, I'll just look good. And I'm like, okay, I can be on board with that. So this is a fascinating little story. I'm just going to read it really quick because this is not the first time that the church has had a stealth, sneak in, sneak out kind of a not groundbreaking, but sort of something to do with the temple site. So I'll just read this really quick. On April 26th, 1838, Joseph Smith received a revelation from the Lord accepting Far West Missouri and commanding that a temple be built. The cornerstones were laid for the Far West Temple on July 4th, 1838 in the following order: southeast by the stake presidency, southwest by the elders quorum presidency, northwest by the bishop, and northeast by the teachers quorum presidency. They had it all mapped out. At the cornerstone laying for the Far West Temple, President Sidney Rigdon gave his famous Independence Day oration. The speech's passionate declarations fueled tensions between the saints and citizens of Missouri, eventually culminating in the issuance of Governor Lilburn W. Boggs' extermination order in October of 1838. We all remember that speech where he basically said, go exterminate the Missourians. And they turned around and said, oh, no, we're going to exterminate you. Back and forth. That was this cornerstone. But what also was prophesied is that the elders of the church would leave for their foreign missions from the site, right? So there's a whole bunch of stuff going on in the area. There's a lot of unrest. So what finally happened, despite the great risk of danger, 5 apostles, accompanied by several others, returned to the Far West Temple site just after midnight on the morning of April 25th, 1839, to fulfill the prophecy. A large stone was rolled on the southeast cornerstone as recommencement of work of the foundation. So they put the stone there to say, see, we started it. And then the apostles left to prepare for their overseas mission. And this is an actual picture because I also was in touch with residents at the time who were leaking information to me. No, I wish it was. But that's very interesting, RFM. Thanks for reminding all of us about that story. It's pretty fascinating.
I'm here for you. What a great job you did there. I think that was a great story.
Yeah.
And I remember reading, because I did read up on this today. That looks like very large stone that they're working on there, because it was supposed to only weigh a ton. And that looks like that probably weighs more than a ton, I'm guessing.
It probably does. Yeah. Who knows what they're up to. So, all right, moving on to more temple news. I'm telling you, there's a bunch of stuff. These next ones will be quick. At the very same time, happening right now, the doors open to the Desert Peak, or is it Deseret? It's Deseret Peak, Utah Temple, literally an oasis in the temple, an oasis in the temple, an oasis in the desert. If you remember, this is a temple that was supposed to go in Urda, 20 miles down the road or so. And instead, there was a bunch of stuff that happened. We're doing a podcast on that. It's a crazy story, but the temple was moved to the Tooele area. And here it is. And I wanted to bring this up because if you look at this picture, this is almost identical to the dimensions of the Lone Mountain Temple. So you can kind of picture how that's going to look, except for there's a gorgeous landmark Lone Mountain behind it that'll be blocked by the temple.
It really does kind of look like a ziggurat, doesn't it?
Yeah. No, I mean, look.
This is a picture. This is not AI, correct?
Yeah. No, I didn't do it. It's on the church's website.
Because to me, this does evoke memories of the Tower of Babel.
Yeah.
And I worked on that, you know.
Yeah, no, I'm telling you, this is exactly what the Lone Mountain Temple is going to look like, which is why the residents are like, wait, what? In my residential area neighborhood? I was at the Smithfield Temple this weekend, and you just can't imagine how large these things are in residential neighborhoods. You cannot imagine. All right, those are some of the stats showing that those are close in size. So I thought it was interesting because there was, of course, a press release about the temple. Very exciting. There's an open house. Anyone can go attend if you're in the area. But of course, I was looking for times where they would mention what? Looking upward, eyes drawn upward. And I was not disappointed. In the press release, they talked about the arches, the lighting, the chandelier, the stained glass, drawing your eye toward heaven. That's one of the phrases that we've heard over and over, because we need to justify the fact that we were going to have tall spires. And so they're putting this into the rhetoric more and more. In fact, I predict at conference this next weekend, we're going to hear a lot about eyes drawn heavenward, where heaven and earth meet, things like that, because they need that. They need that for legal reasons. Here's another phrase. It points our minds upward to Heavenly Father. Things like that are being said. And the strangest one that I thought was just really, really weird, it said the building's woodwork, paint, and the carpeting are designed to point upward to the Savior. Have you ever heard of looking at carpeting, pointing your eye upward to the Savior? I just can't quite understand.
Usually in temples, they're kind of all the same color and sort of an off-white color, maybe.
Yeah, I almost am ready to give up. If the carpeting is now going to draw your eye toward heaven, if carpeting is where heaven and earth meet, I almost give up. It's just almost too much.
Does seem like they're beginning to want to permeate sort of this idea that these things all point upward, huh?
Yep, that's exactly right. And again, if you have not been following it, it's because they need this for legal evidence that yes, tall buildings are part of our worship. You can't stop us from building them. It's our religious right. So, and prior to a couple months ago, that really wasn't in, the verbiage, the talks, the information from the church, but they're definitely making sure it's here. However, as always, somebody didn't get the memo, and this phrase made it in. The covenants of the temple bring a peace and a tranquility and an insurance and a hope in life that no physical building ever could. So again, covenants, what happens inside is more important than the physical building. So there are always people that don't get the memo that you have to promote this doctrine of the steeple. So anyway, that's that open house going on. Attend, report back if you guys are in the area. Okay, one last quick little story, and this is about the Salt Lake Temple. Now, we've been following this renovation for years now. Doesn't it seem like it's been like 10 years?
Forever.
It has been forever. And they keep extending it. They keep, every time I visit, I talk to some kind of fabulous senior missionary guide who spills a bunch of beans. I just love it. I go there as often as I can to get information. They're so cute and so well-meaning. It's wonderful. So this headline says, a look into the transformation. The preservationists lament the gutting of the Salt Lake Temple. Church officials insist the renovation honors the past while looking to the future. And this is an article that's in the Tribune. So this is a picture. And I have to laugh. Somebody on Reddit said, oh, look, they've remodeled it to look just like the inside of a megaplex theater. So it does kind of look a little like that. I don't know. Someone who has a temple recommend will have to go in when it's open and let us know what it's all about. So it says sometime in 2019, when Latter-day Saint officials assured the public that the crucial elements of the Salt Lake City's temple interior would be preserved during the massive makeover and seismic upgrade, President Russel M. Nelson made a momentous decision that kind of changed everything. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints would no longer perform the live temple rituals. Have either of you ever been to the Salt Lake Temple to participate in a live ritual? I never have. I've never been to one. Have you attended one?
I did. I did the Salt Lake Temple live session once on a trip out to Salt Lake when I did the fair conference in 2013.
Wow. And the difference here is, for those that don't know, now most people that go to the temple, they sit in the same room and they watch a film of instruction. But in these temples, there were just a few. You actually move from room to room as you're learning new things, and the rooms are decorated to reflect, earth, heaven. So it's a very interactive experience when you do this. And these are how the old temples were. So it says, in which patrons move from room to room in a richly symbolic reenactment of creation, Adam and Eve's expulsion from the garden, humankind's mortal journey, and the ultimate return to God's presence. These have been central to the experience in the temple since the 1840s. So in the wake of Nelson's decision, the whole architecture that supported the narrative had to be reconfigured because they're not going to do this anymore. And that triggered a huge domino effect as far as the architecture and the artwork in the temple. Steps leading upward to reflect eternal progression. You used to actually walk up steps. Those are gone. Wall murals, visually depicting the stages of human development. Those are gone. Historic woodwork, doorknobs, chandeliers, and needlepoint chairs, mostly gone. The spokesman says, of course, the renovation of the Salt Lake Temple honors the past. Doug Anderson speaking, not Aaron Sherinian. And it addresses safety and seismic concerns, enhances accessibility, and creates more space for larger numbers of Latter-day Saints from around the world to worship God from generations to come. It is done, spokesman said, for function and accessibility. Now, the problem is this was done, again, very clandestinely. This is kind of the theme of my temple talk today. Nobody really knew what was happening. There were gorgeous, gorgeous murals in that temple, many of them by Minerva Teichert, a pioneer era artist. And these were fresco-like paintings, meaning that they were sort of adhered to the plaster of the wall. And as people found out, to their horror, in a lot of cases, pictures were taken, but then they were destroyed. The walls were destroyed. In some cases, the panels were taken off and taken to, I'm guessing, the granite mountain vault, to be held there, but so many were destroyed. And, I've talked to somebody who's in this art world, somebody who is horrified by this. And this person told me, and this is a pretty notable person. You would know his name if I say it, but he told me that everything was run through a wood chipper to stop people from taking a little piece home as an idol or an icon, right? Little piece of the temple stone.
Oh, President Nelson did that to go along with the big piece of granite he has for his new headstone from the temple.
This is what I'm saying. This is a tragedy. I understand updating. I understand accessibility. I also think, had there been anyone on any of these committees among the apostles who was maybe, I don't know, an artist, an architect, someone with a more artistic bent, a woman maybe, somebody that was in the decision-making process, I don't think this would happen. As soon as the world, and I'm talking the world art community, became aware of this and realized that the next temple on the chopping block was Manti. All the same kinds of architecture, the gorgeous murals are in Manti. This is next. They're going to do the same thing. They were up in arms. There was a protest in Provo. People wrote letters. Certain people really championed this to try to stop they couldn't stop Salt Lake. It happened without them knowing, but they're going to stop Manti. In another article, it says, in a blow to preservationists and many Latter-day Saints, historic murals of the iconic Salt Lake Temple, some that were painted by Mormon artists who were sent to study in Paris so they could come back and bring this gorgeous artwork to the Salt Lake Valley in the 1890s. They had been removed during the ongoing renovation and will not be returned. The same extraction is also planned for the Pioneer Era Manti Temple, which houses one of Mormonism's artistic gems, a world room painted by the famed Minerva Teichert, who studied at the Chicago Art Institute in the earliest 20th century. And these are pictures of her. She's incredible. If you're not familiar with her Pioneer Era artwork, it's just amazing. Please go online. There was a wonderful exhibit at the church office, church museum for a while. I think that's gone now, but she's incredible. So public outcry from the world art community. And because it was so public, all of a sudden what happened? A revelation. We're not going to remodel as extensively the Manti Temple. We're going to build an Ephraim temple. We've had a revelation. We'll have a working temple, then we'll kind of have an ornamental temple. And so that's what happened. The revelation for the Ephraim temple happened, and most of the artwork is preserved there. And I'll show you some differences here just really quickly. This is Salt Lake. So no, actually this is Manti. So the one on the left is the original Minerva paintings and how it was. And then you have their update. So it's updated, but the murals are preserved. That's the important part. If anyone attended that open house, please let us know in the comments, because that was fascinating. Here are some examples of the Salt Lake Temple. Here's what you had before. Here's what it's been renovated to. Again, just updated, but some of these gorgeous murals from before are just gone, completely gone, like destroyed. Here was the garden room. That was before. Here you can see after. Very interesting. I mean, I'm kind of sad. I'll try to go to the open house. I was going to say I don't get to go in. Here you can see the little staircase leading up. And then you see the renovated one there on the bottom. So you can find all these pictures online. This is one of my favorites here, a very old picture of the celestial room. And on the very bottom left, you see what the celestial room looks like now. But if you look at the bottom right, there's this thing called the woman at the veil. And it's actually a little piece of artwork that if you look in the top two pictures, it was over the veil. There it is and there it is. It's a woman, right? Well, it's not there anymore if you look at the picture on the bottom left. And this piece of art was actually chosen by Don Carlos Young, son of Brigham Young, the architect of the, back in the day, 1800s Salt Lake Temple. And he fell in love with this statue in New York. He brought it. He knocked the wings off it so that the brethren wouldn't be upset. And it's been hanging up there over the veil for 100 years, but not anymore. It's gone. So I don't know what you want to read into that, but they took away the woman at the veil, not there anymore.
Are those two children on either side of the woman?
Those are cherubim, yeah, and they were used kind of as an example to do this. I guess the ceiling sort of had something like that in the earlier days. So anyway, it's interesting temple news. I'm glad the Manti Temple was saved. I'm sad about the Salt Lake Temple, and that's just a piece of history, I guess.
As long as they still have the
That was a lot of
spittoon,
temple news.
as long as they still have the spittoon there, I'm okay.
You got to have the spittoon, yeah. Why don't you explain that? A lot of our viewers don't know what you're talking about.
I was
Oh,
looking
it
for
is-
that picture just now, RFM, and I don't see him in this one, but I was looking for that photo because I wanted to put it up on the screen and let folks see that. Go ahead. By the way, please explain. I'll keep looking while you're chatting.
There used to be a spittoon in the Salt Lake Temple.
Yep.
Because people would go in there apparently and chew and spit, and they wanted to have a spittoon so it wasn't all over the floor. It's interesting they didn't come up with that idea for, what was it, the School of the Prophets and the 8x8 foot log cabin where Emma was upset about having to clean up all the spit tobacco on the floor. So she complained to Joseph, and Joseph got a revelation from God saying, no Mormon ever can chew tobacco unless they're in the celestial room of the Salt Lake Temple, I guess.
It's where it all happens. Anyway, back to you, RFM. That was a lot of temple news, and we covered it. Whew.
You did a great job. Thank you so much for those reports, Rebecca. Now we're going on to the world of law and last week, and the three lawsuits that are currently ongoing in the United States judicial system regarding tithing. 3 different lawsuits, and it's easy to get confused. As fate would have it, 2 of those cases had oral arguments scheduled last week on Monday and on Wednesday in 2 different cases. So the 9th and 10th circuits are the 2 places where these arguments occurred, because that's where the cases are. Reviewing appeals on the Huntsman case and also on the Gaddy case. And the rulings could also affect a lurking class action suit, the one that didn't have any oral arguments last week. This is the class action that's been consolidated in Salt Lake City from points across the United States by the people who are in charge of organizing and scheduling these cases for the courts of appeal. So here we go. We're going to talk a little bit about those. Now, last week on Monday and on Tuesday over at Mormon Stories, they had Colby Reddish on. And one of them, I think they listened to the oral arguments live. That may have been the second one on Wednesday, and made commentary during that. And the first one, I think they listened to the oral argument after it was recorded, stopped it, made comments. Here's the thing. Oral arguments are going to be made by the attorneys for each side on appeal. The appellate judges are going to ask questions of both sides, and those questions are generally going to be challenging in nature. The problem is that as an attorney with some experience, I have realized that trying to predict what a court is going to end up ruling by the questions they ask during oral argument is often a fool's errand. Because a lot of times, you'd be lucky to get it right 50% of the time. Because judges are not just going to come down on the side that they agree with and ask tough questions to the side that they disagree with. Now, a lot of judges will. A lot of judges will not. They will ask the hard questions to the side that they're leaning toward. And they have a variety of reasons for doing that. And I'm not going to go into what those reasons are. All I'm saying is that trying to figure out which way the judge is going to go or the panel is going to go on appeal from the oral arguments, frequently you'll get it wrong if you're trying to figure it out from what the judges ask. So with that caveat out of the way, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is now battling 3 federal lawsuits. It is an unusual time in church history. All 3 centered on the practice of tithing, each with disaffected church members, mostly I should add to this, accusing the faith's senior leaders of fraud and seeking the return of sizable sums of their past donations. This week, 2 of the cases are scheduled. Now, this article was written written before last week. So this is perspective, talking about 2 of the cases are scheduled for oral arguments. As of the time this was written, that was true. Those arguments have taken place now. Before some of the nation's top appeals courts, both of them a step away from the U.S. Supreme Court. Rulings in either case could have bearing on a 3rd major tithing lawsuit involving plaintiffs from 5 states who are also accusing church leaders of fraud in a putative class action case recently referred to as Salt Lake City federal courtroom. So you sometimes have to keep your dance card straight on this, on all three lawsuits, because there are different issues being raised in different lawsuits. And sometimes there are similar issues being raised among the different lawsuits. But we're just going to talk about the Gaddy case and the Huntsman case that were argued last week. So the Gaddy case, Gaddy et al., there are other plaintiffs. Gaddy is the lead plaintiff versus the Corporation of the President of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is the name of that case. Arguments on a key aspect of this federal case originated in Salt Lake City were heard Monday before the 10th Circuit, and 10th Circuit is the circuit that comprises Utah. The 9th Circuit comprises California. The 10th Circuit at the Byron White U.S. Courthouse in Denver. All right. So it's not just Utah. It also Colorado. The main issue before 10th Circuit judges is this: if religious facts are to be given special treatment under the law, do their proponents have to believe them sincerely? You're going to the issue of sincerity of religiously held beliefs. And we all agree that sincerely held religious beliefs receive First Amendment protection. The question is, were these religious beliefs sincerely held by the leaders, or were they not? And if they were not sincerely held beliefs, are they entitled to First Amendment protection? That's really what's at issue in the Gaddy case. 3 former Latter-day Saints, Laura Gaddy being one of them, sued the Utah-based church in 2019. 5 years ago, this case got started in U.S. District Court in Salt Lake City, asserting the church intentionally misrepresented basic tenets of the faith, inducing them to donate. Their initial complaint sought to challenge the veracity of church truth claims about early revelations from God and Jesus Christ to founding prophet Joseph Smith, and how foundational scriptures such as the Book of Mormon and the Book of Abraham were said to have been translated. Gaddy, for example, contends her faith in church principles began to unravel in 2015 when church leaders pulled Joseph Smith's seer stone from a vault and showed it to the media. That's been 9 years ago, and I think we all remember this photograph. That was the photograph that was published in the Ensign. By the way, I do want to give credit to the individual who covered these stories. That was Tony Semerod of the Salt Lake Tribune. Okay, and he wrote all 3 of these stories, from which I'm gathering snippets to try and give you a basic summation of what's going on in these cases. That crisis, 2015, seer stone, suddenly being revealed by the church as the means by which Joseph Smith translated the Book of Mormon, as opposed to looking at the Reformed Egyptian characters on the gold plates directly. That crisis ultimately led her to file a fraud lawsuit in August 2019, accusing church leaders of misrepresenting its foundational facts and continuing conduct of concealing access to those facts as part of perpetuating an alleged fraud to ensure, among other things, that members' tithing would continue. Church attorneys have argued throughout that none of the key questions raised in Gaddy's lawsuit belongs in a courtroom. Here's what they say: it is not the province of judges or juries to determine whether Moses parted the Red Sea, whether Noah predicted and survived the flood, whether Muhammad ascended to heaven, whether Buddha achieved a state of enlightenment, whether Jesus walked on water, or whether Joseph Smith saw God in Jesus Christ. They wrote in a brief. Each of these issues lies outside the purview of our legal system. Now, they're correct in that assertion. The problem is that that's not what Gaddy and the plaintiffs in that case are arguing. What they're arguing is basically that what you're saying is that Jesus rose from the dead when you know perfectly well you have his body buried in your basement. That's what they're arguing. They're not talking about religious belief. They're talking about you knowing a certain religious belief that you are teaching is false by having the stone in your vault, the seer stone, for over 100 years. You know it's there, and yet you are teaching a method of translation of the Book of Mormon that doesn't have anything to do with the seer stone. It is actually teaching through art and other means that are official channels for the church to its membership. They are teaching a different method of translation. And that is really what it's about, not about this straw manning of the argument. It seems that church lawyers are really good at straw manning arguments. And in this case, and in most cases, by the way, judges will catch on to that pretty quickly. And this judge did as well. And we'll get to that here in a second. Among a host of other legal approaches, plaintiffs in the Gaddy case have used the Racketeer-Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, or RICO, to accuse the church of mail-in wire fraud and communicating what the plaintiffs contend are false church teachings. So in other words, they did this by mail, they did it by wire fraud, they did it by magazines sent to other states. Okay, so it's federal. RICO statute. Ensuing years have seen major portions of the lawsuit, now referred to simply as Gaddy, reviewed and dismissed along the way by federal judge Robert Shelby, largely on grounds that co-plaintiffs were seeking to inject the courts into religious matters that the U.S. Constitution and legal precedents say are shielded from legal intrusions. The suit was in turn reshaped, refiled, and re-argued multiple times in Shelby's Salt Lake City courtroom before the judge dismissed it entirely in March 2023. So this is one of the reasons that there's been kind of this delay, a greater delay in a suit filed in 2019, getting it to the same place as other cases. But it has been reshaped and re-argued multiple times, finally getting dismissed in March 2023, and now Gaddy's appealing it. Gaddy Salt Lake City attorney Kay Birmingham appealed on the sincerity issue, the sincerity of religious beliefs, and other grounds, and the 10th Circuit granted a hearing on the appeal in August 2023. So there's Judge Shelby, who tubed that case and is now on appeal. That's the Gaddy case, 10th Circuit. In the give and take heard Monday, that's the oral argument, the judges seemed to agree with strict church autonomy barriers. One called any delving into actual matters of faith deep religious waters and off limits to the courts. Some of their questions, however, also hinted that secular ways, once again, this the reporter is trying to divine from the questions asked what the judges are thinking. It's a long-standing pastime, and once again, I told you about the difficulties involved in that. But some of their questions, however, also hinted that secular ways remain for ascertaining fraud in the case without violating the U.S. Constitution or legal precedent. Arguments were heard by the 10th Circuit judges, and there's the three names of them. It is unclear what they might rule. Yes, it is very unclear what they might rule. We will not know what they're going to rule until they rule. Monday's hearing brought up a fascinating turn in Mormon history, though, when Phillips questioned, that's one of the judges, Phillips questioned church lawyer David Jordan on conflicting accounts about the Book of Mormon being translated by founding prophet Joseph Smith from gold plates or through visions from a brown seer stone in a hat. Gaddy Salt Lake City lawyer Kay Birmingham argued that the co-plaintiffs would have reassessed their beliefs, membership, and tithing had they known of varying accounts of church history that were withheld from members for fear, according to an affidavit, that some would stop donating. Those material omissions, Birmingham stated, are integral to proving fraud under federal racketeering laws without implicating issues of faith. Facts, Birmingham said, are different than beliefs. Fraud is a misrepresentation of fact, and that's what we have here, she said. And all these artifacts and what's called the stone have been in the church's possession for over 100 years, and they knew or were charged with knowledge under the law that the stone was there. Of course, they knew it was there. And they can't, and what she's saying is they can't just come out and say, well, we didn't know, because it's in your vault. You're charged with knowing it. And there is a picture from a movie. You may have seen this movie. Have you seen this movie, Rebecca or Bill?
Yeah, I've seen this movie.
It's not that old a movie.
No, it's not very old, because I remember thinking that was an unusual looking Joseph Smith.
Yeah.
They
And
do him
what
different every time.
And what he's doing is the very usual thing that we've seen in church art ever since I
Yep.
became a member of the church and before that, which is he's looking at the gold plates. He's got his fingers on them. He's obviously looking at the engravings, and
Yep.
something's going on to where he's able to translate them. He is not looking at a stone in a hat with his face in the hat. So this is part of the alleged fraud by the church in the Gaddy case, that this is a fraud being perpetrated on the members presenting a means of Joseph Smith translating the Book of Mormon that the church knew was wrong, and that they presented it this way in order to keep people paying tithing, because they were concerned if they showed how it really happened, that membership would drop off and tithing would as well. Jordan sought to counter that point later. That was the church's lawyer. When pressed by Judge Phillips, "Isn't that a bizarre thing to say?" the church's lead lawyer said of the plaintiffs. They say specifically, "We don't dispute that the Book of Mormon is true. We don't dispute that it was translated by the gift and power of God. We dispute whether it was translated using the Urim and Thummim, a clear stone, or an opaque stone." That almost sounds silly, he continued. This is the church's lawyer. Churches have the right to define, develop, and evolve their own history. Let me say that again, okay? The church lawyer speaking on behalf of the church states, churches, including the Mormon church, churches have the right to define their own history, to develop their own history, and to evolve their own history. Who knows what happened in 1820, the lawyer continued, for the church, and whether he sat at a table and looked at gold plates. So there's that interesting statement there at the end that he makes, which is kind of shocking, I think, to most members, saying the Mormon church is holding out the right that they have, this right they have to evolve their own history. That's certainly different than the way I thought the church presented its history, at least until I found out that they were hiding stuff, and that the church history they were presenting was very different from the way that it was originally believed to have happened. Let's put it that way. Okay. Also, that middle paragraph is, once again, it's a straw man, where the church lawyer is saying, he's characterizing the plaintiff's argument, right? Gaddy's argument. He's saying that the plaintiffs say, we don't dispute that the Book of Mormon is true. Well, of course, they're not disputing that, because that puts it into the religious category that is protected by the First Amendment. Once again, church lawyer says about them mischaracterizing. Well, this is a correct characterization, actually, that the plaintiffs don't dispute that it was translated by the gift and power of God. Nope, they can't do that either. That's protected by the First Amendment. And he says they dispute whether it's translated using the Urim and Thummim, a clear stone or an opaque stone. No, that's wrong. That's a straw man. That's not what they're disputing. They're not disputing how it was translated. What they are pointing out is that the church took great efforts to mischaracterize how the church itself knew that the Book of Mormon was translated for over 100 years, and that people paid donations in the forms of tithing and other contributions to the church on the basis of that, contributions and tithing that they would not have paid had they known the truth, which the church knew and was keeping from them. That's what the plaintiff's argument is. And actually, I think this is where, that's where the judge jumps in and says, hey, nobody's asking that. Church attorney, hello, McFly. Nobody's asking that. The judge says, because he's saying, don't mischaracterize the other side's argument, okay? This is a court of law. This isn't the playground. And we need to be more professional than that and more on point than that. Nobody's asking that, the judge said. Their argument is, you all have your beliefs and keep them, and we respect that. But don't join us in without telling us key information. I'm wondering if that's an exact quote, because that sounds like it's a little bit disjointed itself. But the meaning is clear, I think. We respect that, but don't join us in without telling us key information, like there was a seer stone. I don't think the plaintiffs are here to prove the untruth or the untruth. See, that should have been truth or untruth. I don't think the plaintiffs are here to prove the truth or the untruth of the LDS Church, Phillips said. What they're saying is, if we had only known these facts, which weren't revealed, we would not have participated. And you all do as you please. So the judge right there he knows what the issue is, and he sees that the church's lead attorney is mischaracterizing the opposition, and he's calling him out on it. All right. Any questions or comments about that before we get to the Huntsman lawsuit and those oral arguments?
Just so that it doesn't get too far away from what we were doing, can I just put it up here really quick? This is the council room that the First Presidency and the 12 would meet in the temple. You can see a picture of Brigham Young on the far wall just to show that it is one. And you can see I see at least two spittoons in there. By the way, it should be noted, if I go back one, this photo took place. And then if I remember the story right, I have the other photo, but if I remember the story right, they sort of didn't want the image to have the spittoons in it. So they did take a secondary photo and remove the spittoons from I believe the same room. So the spittoons are gone in this photo, and they're pretty much taken, I think, essentially at the exact same time, but from a different angle. But anyway, it is a fact that temples did used to have the spittoons. It was really hard to find this. It used to be easy to find these images, hard now. So I did take the image and I just posted it to Ex-Mormon Reddit so that future generations can find it easily.
I think that's great, because that's different, I think, than the picture I had seen with the spittoon, because these spittoons are right next to chairs.
Yeah.
And it looks like one of them is in between two chairs. So either one or both people sitting on either side of the spittoon could use it.
Yeah.
And then there's one that's under, is that a table on the right that it's under?
It looks like some sort of desk or table. Maybe that's where the president of the church would sit so that the other members, let's count those, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So maybe the president of the 12 and the other 11 members of the quorum. And then you've got an altar where they can do some secret sacred ordinances there too. So,
and on the very far right along the edge, it looks like there may be three
chairs for the first presidency. Yeah.
Yeah, they're nicer chairs. And we all know that the first presidency gets nicer chairs than the 12, who get nicer chairs than the 70. And so it goes.
So
okay. Well, I'm glad we're saving that. That's important to save. That's a piece of history that should not be lost, along with the murals. So the Huntsman
I have to say that it's just like the seer stone. They've always told us there were spittoons. It's our fault if we don't know about them or can't find the pictures, right? We've always known. So no, I love your coverage of this, RFM. And I have to say, I'm talking really fast because I took up so much time at the beginning, but the coverage of the two lawsuits at once, it was just fascinating to see the church's lawyers. And to summarize, just in a nutshell, the church's lawyers want to make everything about religion because then it's inadmissible and it's protected. Yeah. So they tried everything they could to make everything religious. Everyone else tried to make it purely fraud. It's simply fraud. And so just to watch them battle back and forth. And there was so much frustration, I think, especially in what you're about to cover with that particular panel. I was like, oh my gosh, don't you guys get it? I felt like the Gaddy judge seemed to sort of get it a lot more, with the back and forth with Huntsman.
Oh, yes.
So I'm looking forward to your coverage. But yeah, it was fascinating just to see, basically, in the Gaddy case, the church's lawyer is say, we have the right to mislead everyone and make things up. That's our God-given right as a religion, which is just insane. Ongoing revelation and ongoing restoration.
Yeah, and that was in the 10th Circuit in front of a regular panel, I believe, of 3 judges. And now we go to the Huntsman lawsuit, which had originally been dismissed by the trial court level, appealed to the 3-court panel, and that reversed the trial judge in favor of Huntsman and against the church in a 2-1 decision. And then the church wanted not to appeal it beyond the 9th Circuit at this point, but instead asked the 9th Circuit to hear this case en banc, which means all of them, instead of just a panel of 3, all of them. And so they had 11 judges from the 9th Circuit Court of Appeals, which is known throughout the United States as being the most liberal circuit court. It comprises California. So there's no big surprise there. The surprise somewhat to me is that from the reporting here, it seems that the judges in the very liberal 9th Circuit Court of Appeals seemed to be more willing to accept the church's First Amendment protection claims than the 10th Circuit did in the Gaddy case that was argued on the same week. So members of the 9th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals in San Francisco repeatedly interrupted lawyers on both sides during an hour-long hearing. Now, this was from last Wednesday, pointing out multiple hurdles to legal examination of the prominent Utahns' assertions, that's Huntsman, that church leaders lied over spending on City Creek Center and misled him into donating. So this case is, once again, it's about tithing, but it's much more restricted to tithing and representations made by the church about how the tithing would be used. It would not be used for it wouldn't be used for the City Creek Mall, and it wouldn't be used to bail out Beneficial Life. So, and then it was. So that's all it is. It doesn't have anything to do with anything even remotely religious. At least I don't think so. And yet it seems like a lot of judges there in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, as soon as you start saying tithing, well, that's a religious idea itself. So let's just go on here. We'll see what happens. Church lawyer Paul Clement, a former U.S. Solicitor General, argued that top leaders of the Utah-based faith never misrepresented how they paid $1.4 billion toward the luxury mall in downtown Salt Lake City, and that the legal doctrine of church autonomy, First Amendment, puts most of the contested issues in the case off limits to court review. There he is. There's the plaintiff, Mr. Huntsman. Indeed, going from statements by several judges who spoke up Wednesday, remember there's 11 of them, my gosh, Huntsman's bid to have his case resuscitated and referred for a trial faces major obstacles. Even parsing basic terminology in the lawsuit, such as the word tithing, or reviewing what might have been meant in reassuring statements from the pulpit by former church president Gordon B. Hinckley, all seemed likely, the judges said, to run smack dab into the U.S. Constitution. And this is the case that has the least to do with church beliefs. So it's the opposite of the way I would have thought that these questions would go. But once again, the questions don't mean anything, all right, insofar as figuring out how they're going to rule. So we'll have to wait to see how they rule. But some of the appellate judges also raised new questions about whether Huntsman is son of the late philanthropist and influential church patron John Huntsman Sr. But some of the appellate judges raised new questions as to whether he was legally domiciled in California when he filed his initial suit there. He filed his suit in California, which is why he's in the Ninth Circuit. And the other suit, Gaddy, filed in Salt Lake City, which is why it's in the 10th Circuit. But the question was brought up by judges whether there was actually jurisdiction, whether he was legally domiciled in California when he filed this lawsuit there. So that would be a question of whether even the Ninth Circuit has jurisdiction to even be hearing this appeal, and whether he had the jurisdiction to file it there in the first place. So the attorney for Huntsman, named John Ellis, countered with case law supporting that it doesn't matter that the concept of donation may be cloaked in religion. That's not a way to get away from fraud. Now that makes sense to me, and I think that is the state of the law. In other words, it would be a strange thing indeed to say that a church can engage in openly fraudulent behavior, something that everybody would agree is fraudulent. And I talked about hookers and blow the last time we talked about this. If the church, any church, were to say, we'd like your donations, all donations that you give us are going to be used for this specific religious purpose, but instead of using for that purpose, they took it all and they spent it on prostitutes and cocaine, okay? That would seem to be an obvious example where even though it's a church doing the fraudulent behavior, that fraudulent behavior would not be protected by the First Amendment. And that's what the attorney for Huntsman is talking about here. And frankly, the same attorney said, that's why every single judge that's looked at this case so far, which was the 4 below, the first one at the trial, the 3 on appeal, every single judge that's looked at this case so far has reached the same conclusion with respect to the First Amendment, even where they may have staunchly disagreed on other issues. So you have the situation where all 4 judges who have looked at this up to this on-bank hearing have not agreed with the church's argument that the First Amendment gives them protection. They, all 4, did not buy into that. But now we're up at the on-bank hearing with 11 judges, and they're asking questions that indicate that they are willing to give this argument by the church credence and perhaps rule on the basis of the First Amendment, in spite of what the first 4 judges thought. And this is a screenshot of this case being argued. And you can see the 11 judges up there in the top frame. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. 11 judges. This is very unusual. Something like that's going to happen, but it's happening here in this case. Huntsman's refund claim on his tithing, Clement added, that's the church's lawyer, is also barred from judicial review under church autonomy enshrined in the First Amendment. This case ultimately boils down to the question, he said, of what a church leader meant and what a church member understood when the former talked about tithing funds in contradistinction to earnings on invested reserve funds. Okay. And I think everybody here realizes that they're talking about President Hinckley. I think it was in 2003 General Conference, where he said the tithing funds would not be used on the temple, and then equivocated a bit, sort of, by saying, yeah, but it could be used from this source of money or this source of money. Anyway, that's what they're talking about. Later, this is the name of a judge, Nyen, and other judges challenged Clement on why the faith had argued its side of the case at the district court level, first and foremost on questions of financial facts, as opposed to invoking the shield of church autonomy from the get-go. And judges, attorneys who are arguing, whether it's on appeal or otherwise, they are not immaculate in their arguments. I mean, they strive to be, right? But on the other hand, judges are not immaculate in the comments and questions that they make and ask during these same oral arguments. Just because they're wearing a black robe doesn't mean that suddenly everything they're saying is right or makes sense. This I don't understand, because it was argued. If they didn't argue it first and foremost, they did argue it, because each of the four judges below, as we know, rejected that argument. And yet this judge, Nyen, is trying to say, why didn't you lead with that? Okay, fine. They argued it. The church went ahead and put its financials on the table and characterized them a certain way. Janellis added about early stages of the case. When Huntsman sought to contradict those financial assertions, saying tithing was used for City Creek, all of a sudden the church said, oh, this is a constitutional First Amendment issue up front and center. Ultimately, getting to the bottom of those financial disputes, Janellis said, argues strongly in favor of returning the case for a trial and further discovery of evidence, which is what they would like to have happen, what Huntsman would like to have happen. It's simple math, he said. And I think this was an effective statement. It's simple math, he said. Let's count up what's in this pile. In other words, the tithing pile versus the proceeds or investment earnings from tithing, that pile, right? It's simple math, he said. Let's count up what's in this pile. Let's count up what's in this pile. And let's see if that's consistent with what we submit was a secular statement by President Hinckley about what pile was used. So he says we got to go back to the trial court and have a trial and get more discovery on this issue. Okay, so finally, California versus Utah. This is one of those situations where one of the judges gets a bright idea and brings up an issue that's an important issue in the case, or could be an important issue in the case, that neither of the parties had brought up prior to this point. And the judge comes out with it and says, oh, what about this issue? Yeah, lawyers hate this. Judges do this because they let me be as charitable as I can to judges, okay? Even appellate court judges. This is the only fun they get. The only fun they get is going out there and hearing the lawyers come in and making their arguments and being able to sit up there above the lawyers and look down on them and ask questions to try and make them look stupid and make the judges look smart. This is the fun they get. And some of them enjoy it more than others. This is a case like this and an issue like this. On top of these fractious issues, Huntsman's case faces a new and last-minute dispute over whether the Ninth Circuit, which encompasses California but not Utah, is the correct place for his appeal to be heard. Although the question had not been raised by lawyers on either side until Wednesday. By the way, I don't think it was raised by attorneys on either side even until Wednesday. It was never raised by them. This is oral argument, and Judge Nyen, again, noted at one point that Huntsman's California business, a film distribution company called Blue Fox Entertainment, listed his personal address in Utah. So Nyen says, this judge, he obviously has the ability, Huntsman obviously has the ability to have homes in a lot of different places, but the judge questioned why the issue hadn't been triggered earlier in the case. We would have benefited from findings by the district court, but neither party really raised the issue below. Okay, so of course, Huntsman's side hates it when a judge does that, because a judge is supposed to be a referee. A judge is supposed to be an umpire. And it's very difficult for some judges to restrict themselves to what I consider to be the proper function of a judge, which is you call the balls and you call the strikes. You don't come up with new issues that were not raised by the parties, because all of a sudden now you're starting to look like you're taking sides and you're becoming an active player in the game instead of just being the umpire. So that's one side. That's Huntsman's side. The other side, of course, they're thankful that the judge is coming up with an issue that would help them, the church, right? But on the other hand, it makes them look like a bunch of idiots because they never came up with this issue. And now the judge finally, at this point in the proceedings, one of the judges saying, hey, why didn't you bring up this jurisdictional issue at the trial court level? So that's a mixed blessing if you're the church, because you're going, oh, there's another issue that we could prevail on. Thank you. On the other hand, it's kind of late to talk about it now because nobody brought it up before and it hasn't been investigated, or there haven't been facts that have been made part of a hearing, part of the record on the issue, because nobody thought it was an issue, so nobody looked at it. So I don't know if anything's going to happen with that. All sorts of things could happen with this case. We've got 11 judges now, and I don't know how many opinions they're going to end up writing as a result of this. There's obviously going to be at least one opinion. That's going to be the ruling opinion. But with 11 judges, I got to think there's going to be a dissenting opinion, and different judges will sign off on that. And maybe there'll be a different dissenting opinion, and there'll be a concurring opinion, and maybe another concurring opinion. A concurring opinion means that you agree with the majority decision, but you disagree with how they got there. And you would have got to the same place, but a different way. And a dissenting opinion means you disagree with the majority opinion because they came to the wrong result. And that's the dissenting opinion. So it's going to be a mess.
And majority rules RFM?
Oh, yes. Yeah. It can get very confusing in some opinions. And the more judges you've got, the more likelihood you have of having this happen. But you can have different judges say, okay, I agree. Here's the lead opinion. And here you've got like 3 judges who disagree with one part of the lead opinion, but they agree with the second part of the lead opinion, and maybe 5 other justices who agree with the second part of the lead opinion, but they agree with the first part, and you have to go in and count. Sometimes you actually have to count how many people, how many judges agree with different issues within the lead opinion in order to determine what the majority ruling was on that particular issue, which may not be reflected, obviously, by just the number of judges who sign off on different things. And this looks like it could be heading for something like that. Anyway, it'll be very interesting to find out what happens. And typically, you're looking at months. It's going to be months before these judges now have their clerks get busy and write up their opinions for them. And when we find out, we'll report it. So that's the news there on the oral arguments for those 2 cases, the Getty case and the Huntsman case that occurred last week. And I guess I'm still in charge of tonight's show, so I better continue and say that let's go to the next thing, which is it's Bill. Bill, we're going to put you at the top of the screen right now, and I'll let you take over for what it is that you'll be talking about. Oh, top changes in the LDS Church under President Nelson.
Yeah, I wanted to. This was a story that came out a week and a half ago or so, maybe 2 weeks ago. We've talked about it in other places, but I made a fun little video to help the audience understand the story. So with that, here we go. Good evening. Jana Reese, Mormon journalist from the Religion News Service, covered recently the top 10 changes that have occurred under LDS President Russel M. Nelson's leadership. How was that data collected? Well, the Next Mormon Survey 2, conducted in 2022 and 2023, gathered responses from 1,420 Americans, identifying themselves as Latter-day Saints. The survey asked participants to rate 15 specific changes introduced by President Russel M. Nelson, using a scale ranging from very favorable to very unfavorable. Respondents who rated at least one change as very favorable, a total of 1,268 people, were given a follow-up question, asking them to choose their single most favored change. This follow-up helped filter out any blanket positive responses, providing a clearer measure of which changes were truly the most beloved by church members. This led to the top 10 changes that the LDS Church has made, while President Nelson, prophet, seer, and revelator, has been at the helm. So here is the top 10 list. Number 10, President Nelson called the first Asian American and first Brazilian apostles, bringing more global diversity to church leadership. Now, in 2024, here we are celebrating the church's first real step into the top leadership not being 15 white Caucasian males. Number 9, changes to temple rituals expanded the role of Eve and increased equality for women in sacred ceremonies. Or in other words, the church reduced the amount of sexism and unhealthy perspectives about women in the temple. Number 8, the church ended its century-long relationship with the Boy Scouts of America, choosing to focus on its own youth programs. And one must at least wonder how this ties to the fallout of the LDS Church and the Boy Scouts of America tied at the hip in child abuse settlements regarding all the children molested by LDS Scoutmasters. Number 7, women and youth are now allowed to serve as witnesses for baptisms, making a significant step toward gender inclusivity. There you go, women. You should be happy now. You, along with the children, get to witness baptisms. What huge strides we are making. Number 6, the 1-year waiting period between civil weddings and temple sealings was removed, making temple access easier for newlyweds, allowing them to have their wedding and still get sealed immediately following. But can you imagine how many parents, siblings, and other loved ones, including my own mother and father, had to miss the marriage of the one they love, weddings they had anticipated their entire lives? Can you imagine the harm and hurt done in the name of the old policy, only to have the church acknowledge in the modern age that it wasn't even necessary? Number 5, parents are allowed to accompany their children during bishops' interviews, providing more transparency and safeguarding for families. First, isn't it Sam Young that we should thank for this? And in 2024, shouldn't the policy be 2 adults are required, not allowed, to be in the room? By saying allowed, you're also saying that continued child abuse is also allowed. Number 4, missionaries were granted the ability to call home weekly, a shift toward more emotional support for young missionaries. Can you imagine the outside perspective of how unhealthy it is to require that barely adult humans in a high-demand religion who are pressured to leave their families for 1.5 to 2 years to go out to a foreign place with no family support system be demanded to pay to get there and to live there, only to work long hours and spread a particular religion's message, and then only being allowed to call home twice a year? That is the textbook definition of what a cult does. And only recently, we finally softened up to where everything I said is still true, except now you get to call home weekly. Number 3, Nelson emphasized using the full name of the church, discouraging the use of the term Mormon to align with doctrinal teachings. When one considers how attached to this name we were in the past, it seems most likely an attempt to distance the church from the general public connecting it to the criticisms about it, and to get one last dig at former church president Gordon B. Hinckley. It also seems to indicate that the church recognizes that the name Mormon just doesn't sit well with people outside the church. Number 2, the Come Follow Me program encouraged gospel study at home, reflecting a broader move towards individual and family-centered worship, thereby making any problematic teachings passed from parents to children now the fault of the parents and the home, allowing the LDS Church to shift the blame even further for what others internally took to heart from what the church has taught its members in the past. And, drumroll please, the number 1 top change made under President Nelson: church members overwhelmingly favored the shift to a 2-hour meeting schedule, down from 3 hours, improving the overall experience for many. In other words, the best thing the LDS Church gave us, in the opinion of believing Latter-day Saints, under the leadership of President Nelson, was less Mormonism. If you want to grasp how blind obedience and loyalty work, one only need wrestle with how believers see so much positivity in a list of changes from an unhealthy faith running away from its claims, its history, and its bad behavior.
That is a really interesting report, Bill. It does strike me that that's amazing that the number one best change, probably not just in President Nelson's administration, this is probably since Joseph Smith, is having less church, or at least since 40 years ago when they put it all together in the combined block of 3 hours instead of making you go to church like 3 times on Sunday.
Can I just say too, it becomes even, it's a rational perspective to think then that 1 hour of church would be welcomed and seen as more beneficial than 2 hours of church. And then it's only a hop, skip, and a jump till you have no church at all. And maybe people would just be thrilled with that too.
It seems that COVID allowed a lot of people to think that, which they never would have thought before.
And most of them, or many of them anyway, didn't come back.
Yeah. Rebecca, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, I was laughing and then I kind of stopped laughing. That was an excellent, excellent video, Bill, because for every one of those things that you read, too little, too late, you know? I mean, where was another adult in the room during a bishop's interview in 1978 when my bishop told me what masturbation was, right? Where was 1 hour, 2 hour church when I had to go in the morning and at night, and then the 3 hour block for 30 years, you know? Where was the new sealing versus ceremony when my grandma couldn't see my mom be married? Every single one of these, you know, surface, oh, that's great. But behind it, decades and decades of pain and nothing that was necessary if you can just change it like that. And I thought Landon made a good point in the chat. I'm kind of following the chat. My co-host, he said, we say these are President Nelson's changes. Aren't they God's changes? Which makes it even worse, you know, given the wake of just not great things that happened behind every single one of these top 10. So I don't know. To me, laughing at first, but now, not so happy about it.
Yeah, and my understanding is leaving God out of it for a second here, that even though a lot of these changes occurred under Russel Nelson's administration, that doesn't mean that he came up with them or initiated them after he was called to be the president. A lot of them had been in the works for some years before this.
It's true.
Yeah. I just want to know one thing, which I said in here, but I want to emphasize it. My parents were non-members. I was a convert to the faith.
Yep.
My mom had 2 boys, me and my brother. He was 4 years younger than me. And she had planned out her whole life to be able to attend her 2 boys' weddings. And her oldest son, me, when I joined Mormonism, I thought the rules were important. I gave her this reasoning, this whole idea of the Levites and you can't study the ark, and none of that worked. And it caused a deep strain on me and my mom's relationship for over a year or 2. By them making the change, by the way, healthy changes, too little, too late, Rebecca, you're right. But by making the change, what they effectively said was, we never needed to do that in the first place. In other words, my mom suffered and I suffered for what President Nelson's modern era says was never needed to have happened. You didn't need to suffer. We could have. There was no real requirement to wait a year. God did not care. It was us that cared, because you can't have God going, yeah, my children in the 1980s needed this, but my children in the 2020s, they don't. That's ridiculous. And so what Nelson effectively did in making a positive change is admit to my face that they screwed my mom over and kept her from being able to witness her son's marriage.
Wow.
Yep.
I think most of the people in the audience know that your mom has since passed away, Bill.
Yeah, died of cancer about 4 years ago.
I don't have anything to add to that, and I don't think I could add anything to that. Rebecca, do you want to add anything to that before we close the show?
No, it's just too unsettling and disturbing, and there's too much that was negative. So I have one more little segment about conference. So let's end on a positive note. If we go
That's
back
right.
to the
Conference
slide.
is this coming weekend, isn't it?
It is. I have one little tidbit here, and we'll get out of here in like 3 minutes. So, for the last couple years, all of us that have been podcasting, we're like, there's nobody at conference. Look at all those empty seats. Maybe it means nobody's going. But if you go to the venue, you find people outside begging for tickets. I've talked about this before with signs standing there on the sidewalk saying, family from Brazil, we need 10 tickets, or we'll trade chocolate for tickets. I'm not kidding. It's this circus outside of the conference center trying to get in, and people bartering and begging for tickets with, whatever they've got. Well, the reason that there were limited tickets was simply since COVID, parking, construction, they were actually limiting the amount of tickets for people that could go in. Good news, they are back to full capacity, 21,000 tickets for each session available. For the first time in 5 years, Conference Center will be at capacity seating for general conference. So I have a picture on the top of what we're used to lately. And then on the bottom, there we go again, packed to the rafters. So when everybody stands up and sustains, we can hear it, we can see it. And so that's, over 100,000 if every single ticket were unique could attend in that day. So that's great news, right? I don't know, maybe some of our viewers or listeners are going to conference. We'll have to get reports back, but that's exciting. So I kind of thought, conference is a supercharged weekend for post and nuanced Mormons. And I got to thinking about all the different reasons that we may find ourselves watching conference. So I made a list, and you can tell me if you think that any of these you can relate to, or someone who falls into this. So I'm calling this the types of Exmo conference watchers. Okay. One that is out there is the avid note taker. This is somebody that fills notebooks of what they're hearing. They're going to go back. They're going to look at everything. They're going to make sure everything's correct. The avid note taker. The next one is what I am, the cutthroat meme maker. That means that you hear a talk and you pull out exactly what's needed, and you put a picture with it, and you throw it up on social media, and you wait for all the likes and the comments to come in. That's me. I'm the cutthroat meme maker at conference. You also have the I can't look away watcher, right? You don't want to watch it, but you're kind of watching. You just like a train wreck. You just can't look away. That's another kind of a watcher. You have the I'll let someone else watch it for me watcher. And that would be like RFM's wonderful broadcast. Are you still doing that this conference session? Every year we hope you will, but then we think, are you okay? Is it taking its toll?
It's definitely taking its toll, but this will be the third general conference in a row that Radio Free Mormon will be watching each and every session and then reporting live at the close of each session for up to an hour of recap on what was said, what wasn't said, and what was implied.
You're almost like Jesus, RFM, like you get up on the cross and suffer for all of us so that we don't have to suffer.
The funny thing is, you're not the first person to say that to me.
Won't be the last either.
Compare you to Jesus.
Yes, it's like Radio Free Mormon. We're bigger than Jesus.
Well, you're taking one for the team, that's for sure. Thank you for your service, RFM, because I'll be watching for sure. Also, Nemo has a wonderful conference update too that goes on every year. So these things happen.
He may or may not be a member when he's doing by this coming weekend, by the way. We hadn't mentioned that yet, but as of
just this afternoon, he still was.
Right.
Yeah,
and
he put out an update.
Yeah, he did. I'm sorry. I'm looking at
unless there's a breaking news update right now. He put out a little reel this afternoon and said he still was. So
this afternoon, our time, right?
Our time. Yes. Sorry, that would be our time. Okay. Yeah. The other type is the super fact checker. We've all been that and known that, where you hear something, you're like, oh no, that's not right. And you're instantly looking it up. You got to find out what's the truth right there, real time, the super fact checker. Another one, unfortunately, I think a lot of us can relate to this, the trapped with family watcher, right? You just can't get out of it. Mom invites you over. There's pot roast. You're sitting there. The kids are asleep on you. You can't get up. There's nothing you can do but put headphones on. So I like this one. This is in more recent years, the Is President Nelson AI checker. I've been that. I've done that. Other people have done that, and they post about it, just trying to see what exactly is happening. This is one, the I need to find out what my TBM family is being told watcher. And I think this is more one of the bigger reasons. For example, during the Celestial Talk, where President Nelson told people like my children, don't listen to anybody that's not faithful, i.e. your mother, I needed to know that to see, what that was going to do to the dynamic. So that's a more serious one. And I think the best one of all, my last one, was this weekend conference, the Free Spirit. I think that's maybe a milestone when you don't even realize that it's conference anymore. So, and now I joke about this. Can you guys relate to it? Before I go on quickly, what would you call yourself? Do any of those stand out to you as how you watch conference? If you do.
Then or now?
Now, these are Exmo conference watching.
I'm pretty much close to that last one. If RFM didn't tell me he was covering conference, I would not have known conference was coming. So
wow, you are graduating, Bill. This is amazing.
Well, at this time of the year, General Conference looms like a thundercloud on the horizon.
It's very poetic. Well, and you have to watch it. You're the note taker, the fact checker. You're all of that because you're doing that for all of us. So that's wonderful. And
but I want to give a special shout out to the very TBM General Conference watcher who are classified as the copy, paste, and send to a family member who really needs to hear this particular conference talk.
Gosh, yes. I forgot about that.
We
That
love
would be,
those
we're on
guys,
the
don't we?
receiving end, of that.
By the way,
all the
if
time.
anybody's in the sound of my voice who's even tempted to do that, don't, okay? Because you look like a self-righteous ass, and it's never going to get you what you want anyway.
Whew, there you go. RFM getting spicy.
And amen.
So I joke about these, little facetious, but I do know. Are you doing the Hosanna shout? From Mormonism After Dark. That was hilarious. But I do know that conference is a supercharged time. So please, self-care, be careful. It is. And I made this meme to just say, keep calm and honestly stay off social media. If you know you're triggered by this, just don't go on Facebook. Don't go on Reddit. Just don't. Just have a peaceful weekend. Keep the peace. Now, if you are going to watch conference, I have created the Bite Model Conference Bingo. You can use this for each talk because I guarantee it will be blackout every time. The center square is, instead of free space, free agency. But these are all the things that you can be aware of that I'm sure will be manifest in almost every single talk. So, and I made a joke that
those would be behavior control for the B, information control for the I, thought control for the T, and emotional control for the E in the Bite model. Is that right?
Yep. Everything.
So as soon as you hear one of those being used, you get to cover that square.
That's right. You get to cover that square. And like I said, this isn't for all of conference. I think this is for each talk. Honestly, I think probably you would be able to cover almost every square.
Yeah,
in
some
each
talks
talk.
you could do blackout bingo on this.
That's what I mean. I think that you could. Yeah.
I do have a
song
question,
for
Rebecca.
this. What?
I have a question for you. So I know that if they just say agency, that you'll probably count it. I would think we would count that. But what if they say moral agency or representative agency? Do I still get to use the free agency?
You do. Yeah, because those are the new words. And I know that it's moral agency, but free space is what it normally says right there. So yeah, you can put that there and they'll probably say that every time. So, and I made up a song for this. I know you probably are the only one, RFM, that was old enough to watch Annette Funicello and Frankie Avalon, the beach movies. Do you remember those from the 70s?
Bingo.
Yeah. So Bite Model
Vacation is here. Beach party tonight.
Bite Model Bingo. It's going to be stuck in your head all conference if you start singing it. Bite Model Bingo. I'm telling you. I think that's all we've got. I think we're done.
Bill?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I tell you you're muted, but you were
about half an hour ago.
What's that?
The answer to your question. You remember what your question was? I have the answer to your question about whether you get to cover that space in the middle. If moral
agency and representative agency.
The answer is it's up to you.
It's up to you. That's agency right there.
Boy, that took a while to get that punchline out.
That was great.
Hopefully it was worth it. Anyway, so that's it for tonight. Correct me if I'm wrong. Excuse me, I'm in charge, so I should be. Thank you. So that's been the Mormon Newscast this Monday, September 30th, 2024. This day will never come again, and we can all be grateful for that. Thanks everybody for watching the show tonight. Please join us next week. Oh, hit like, hit subscribe, please. Leave a comment below. And I know that Rebecca over at Mormonish, no, wait, it's the Mormon Newscast, has its own Facebook page on which we throw up frequently news stories. And Rebecca does most of that, actually. She puts up news stories, but also we want to solicit other people who are listeners. If you see a news story relating to Mormonism, go ahead and put that up on the Mormon Newscast Facebook page. It is a group effort. That's been the show for tonight. Please join us next week in October for the next episode, next Monday of the Mormon Newscast. Once again, thanks for joining us, and good night, everyone.
Boyd Ginspacker here. That's a wrap for this week's edition of the Mormon Newscast. We appreciate you tuning in and sharing this time with us. Keep the conversation going and stay informed on all things Mormonism. Until next week, wishing you peace and joy. See you next Monday at 6 p.m. on the Mormon Newscast. And no matter what they say, I never did touch my little factory.